Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Bradley Ludke, and I will be your moderator. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar in our 5-part series with Stan Garfield, The 5 C's of Knowledge Management. This first session is titled Part 1, Capture. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Stan Garfield. Stan is a respected knowledge management practitioner, author, speaker, and community leader. He has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website, so please feel free to check those out after today's session. Take it away, Stan.
Thank you, Brad. As Brad mentioned, we're going to be doing a series of webinars focused on the 5 C's of knowledge management. And today, in the first session, we'll talk about capture. In subsequent sessions, we'll cover curate, connect, collaborate, and create. And we'll try to tie these together as we go. Capture is an important part of a knowledge management strategy, and according to Gartner, they give some reasons here as to why that is. The knowledge capture is important by taking tacit knowledge, that knowledge which exists in people's heads, and turning into something explicit that can be reused. So the fact that we have knowledge in our heads is good, but until we do something where we can put it down in a form that can be understood and reused by other people, it's strictly in our heads. So as essential as direct interactions are between people, those don't necessarily scale to the entire enterprise. If we had to count on people talking to each other directly in order to share their tacit knowledge, it wouldn't be efficient and wouldn't even be possible. But if we can capture some of what's in people's heads in ways that other people can seamlessly retrieve it, then the entire enterprise can benefit from a single capture across many, many people. And capturing the subject of those interactions in some durable form is necessary beyond making the connection. And the examples that we'll cover in today's webinar include documents and knowledge bases and repositories that help preserve expertise, even when the source of that expertise is unavailable. They might be unavailable because they're in a different part of the world and they're not awake. It could be unavailable because they're busy on a project. It could be unavailable because they're no longer working for the organization. But if you found some way to capture some of what they knew and put it in a form that can be retrieved, then capture becomes an important part of a knowledge management strategy. Having said that, there are challenges that exist in trying to capture knowledge. One of the leaders in our field of knowledge management, Dave Snowden, is famously quoted for saying, if you ask people to give you your knowledge on the basis that you may need it in the future, then you will never receive it. Meaning that it's hard to get people to write down things if they're not sure how that knowledge will be used. It's difficult to capture knowledge. And also, if you capture it, there's no guarantee that it will be reused. So if you go to a lot of trouble of capturing, but nobody uses that, then it's sort of a waste of time. Digital challenges are that many programs have emphasized capture and collected lots of documents and put them in repositories, but it's not been that effective. So it's fair to question the value of devoting resources to collecting documents in advance of a need. What Dave basically says is that people will help you out at the time of need when they can see directly how what they're going to share is going to benefit you, but they're reluctant to do that in the absence of that need. So if you ask me to just write it down or upload it into a file, and I'm not sure if it will ever be used, I don't know, so I want to spend the time doing that. But if you ask me directly, then I can see how it will help you. I'll be more willing to do it. So therefore, with those challenges, is it possible for us to capture knowledge, or will people resist it? Well, there are many opportunities if we can figure out how to capture knowledge for it to be used effectively. Some examples here. If we store information on every project that's undertaken in an organization and put that into a repository, there's a lot of power that can result from that. We can always then find out what work have we done. If someone asks us about this, we can go and find it. We can capture tips and rules of thumb and insights and knowledge nuggets and pieces of software code and other kinds of content that other people can then benefit from if in fact we've taken the time to capture it. And we can enable reuse of documents such as proposals, statements of work, project plans, designs, guides, other kinds of written materials that, if written down and easily retrievable, can be effectively reused to save time, to avoid redundant effort, to make sure that the very best work is being reused. Capture provides a supply of knowledge. If you think about supply and demand, especially we refer to that in economics, about keeping supply and demand in balance. Well, the supply of knowledge is enabled by capture. If we don't have any knowledge captured, then we get out of balance. When there's demand for it, but there's no supply, it's frustrating. If you go to look for something that you hope is out there and it's not there, then you have to go about trying to get somebody to create it or supply it or contribute it. But if it's already there, then when the demand exists, the demand could come in the form of a search or a query. And then if it finds something as a result of that search, the supply is provided to meet the demand. So the supply side knowledge management includes collecting documents and files, capturing information and work products, and storing these explicit forms of knowledge in repositories so they can be retrieved. So the idea here is we need to keep a supply of knowledge there so that the people who are looking for it can find it. The demand for knowledge needs to sort of over time equate to the supply of knowledge. If you don't have any demand for knowledge, that's the other side of this. We talked about if knowledge is never reused, there's no value in it. So you not only want to capture it, you want to make sure that there are ways once it's been captured for it to be effectively found, retrieved, and reused. It's an example of a knowledge capture process that we used when I was at Hewlett-Packard. We called it the knowledge capture and reuse process, emphasizing both sides of supply and demand. And it was an official process and a policy at Hewlett-Packard that said for all projects that were delivered, there had to be knowledge capture at certain defined time along this life cycle. So the delivery side of projects had to be followed from the opportunity creation, opportunity evaluation, development and bid, negotiate and close phases. And you see two yellow boxes here that say capture. And the idea was that when we won a deal or lost a deal, we want to capture information about that in what we call the win-loss lessons learned. And when we delivered it, we wanted to capture the closeout lessons learned. And we also wanted to capture the other documents that you see at the bottom, bid collateral that we used to actually win the bid, and the project profile, which was information about each project which we worked on. And at the end, we wanted to come up with win-loss lessons. We wanted bid collateral and update the project profile, but also any delivery collateral. So the idea was, for all the work that we did, we wanted to make sure that those projects could be found, the materials associated with those projects could be retrieved and potentially reused. So when we started a new project that was similar to the one we had delivered already, we would take advantage of the fact that we had already done one of these projects. We wouldn't start from scratch. We wouldn't reinvent the wheel. We'd start by taking materials that had already been developed and reusing them on the next project. So that's the reuse part of it. And the capture part of it was that you had to contribute these things. You didn't have an option. You were required to do it as a policy. And this process that you see defined here then was in effect for the entire systems integration and consulting business at Hewlett-Packard, and was an effective way of ensuring that capture was done as part of every project. Let's talk about three types of capture: content, information, and input. We'll go through each of these three. When we talk about content, that includes documents, communications, training, and other kinds of files. We'll go through them one at a time, starting with customer documents. So examples of customer documents that would be worthwhile to capture would include brochures, product specifications, product descriptions, proposals that are delivered to customers, presentations designed for customers, and case studies and references. So if we're able to capture those things, the advantage of that is that the next time we are trying to win a new customer or win a new deal, we already have materials that we've created that can be used for that. If we've already won a project, we can create a reference account based on that, and materials in that reference account can be used to help win the next customer. Internal documents include processes, procedures, and policies that we have in effect in our organization, include minutes of meetings, include notes, reports, plans, any kind of documents that we routinely generate as part of doing our work. Being able to capture those will allow those to be found later. They can be updated, adapted, repurposed, but once again, it avoids having to start from scratch. Now, what sort of a note of caution here is you don't want to try to capture every document that anyone ever creates, because number one, that's a lot of material. Number two, it would be hard to then sort through it and find that which is useful and which is not useful to be reused. So therefore, you don't want to try to capture everything. You want to be selective. So in the previous example, we talked about the knowledge capture and reuse process. Specific document types were defined that needed to be captured. So not everything, but those that would be the most beneficial for reuse. And then other content includes publications. These could be handbooks, guides, and other books that are created. They could be articles, essays, periodicals, and they can include lessons learned and proven practices. And we'll talk more about those in greater detail. So lessons learned are things that we learn when we've delivered some kind of a project, we've taken some kind of an action that we want to apply later on based on what we learned. Here are 3 examples of lessons learned. One is called an after action review. So during and after an activity or a project, if you can document the steps that occurred and what was learned as a result, that can be applied towards future activities and projects. Another example is called a peer assist, where you learn from the experience of others before you start a new activity or project. So you bring in a team of people that worked on a project similar to the one you're about to start, and you ask questions of them, and you hear their stories, and you understand from them the things that they learned from doing that project, which gives you a head start on the one you're doing that's similar. And a retrospect is a structured and facilitated knowledge capture meeting at the end of a project, where you capture lessons that were learned during that project. And then for all of these, the important part of this is not only the capture, but it's also make sure your process includes the steps necessary for these to be applied. So one of the great dangers of creating a giant lessons learned database is that if it's only written into, but it's not retrieved from, then all you have is a write-only database where lessons are filed but never retrieved. What you want to make sure of is that for every action that you take to capture knowledge, there's a process to ensure that it can be reused, can be applied, that the lessons you learned will be used to make sure that the next time you do it even better. So whatever you do, don't make your repositories such that lessons are put into them, but they go there to die and are never seen again. Proven practices are ways of capturing processes that have proven to improve business results so that others can benefit from those successes. When you've done something well, and it's something that other parts of an organization will also need to do in the future, it's useful to make sure that the entire organization is aware of where that's been done successfully. So the methods that have been demonstrated to be effective and that lend themselves to being replicated are ones that you want to make sure get captured. And so a whole process for capturing and replicating proven practices can be quite important to an organization. These are sometimes referred to as best practices, That's probably the more commonly known name. The problem with that is that it implies that there is a single best way of doing something, and that may not be in fact the case. Proven practice is more specific. It refers to the fact that this has actually been done and been successful. It makes no claim as to whether it's the best, just says this has worked, and therefore you may want to apply it because it's already been shown to work. Once again, you want to have a replication process in place so that the proven practices are not only captured, but that they're replicated so that the organization benefits. Communications include announcements, communiques, newsletters, any kind of communication that you want to capture and to make sure that it's available later. So as an example, let's talk about a newsletter. If you publish a newsletter and send it out in email, it would be nice to have it so that it can be found later and retrieved. So that whatever you do, you don't want to have communications that go out and then are sort of lost or can't be found or they're difficult to locate. You want to have them in a way that they can be easily found and someone can refer back to them. So that's the whole purpose of capture, is to make something so that it can be later found and used. Same thing applies to conference calls, podcasts, audio recordings. If you have meetings, if you have conference calls, if you have sessions where you want to make sure that what was presented, what was discussed, is not lost, that it can be retrieved, people can go back and listen to it, people can go back and learn from it. You want to have a way of capturing that. An example of that is a community that I lead, which is called the SIKM Leaders Community. It's a knowledge management community that's been around for the last 18 years. And during those 18 years, every single month, we've had a conference call open to all the members where we have a presenter, we record that presentation, and we make that available so that it can be found later. Well, that's several hundred recordings, all of which are still available. And the idea is that by capturing that, not only the people that were able to attend the call live, but everyone who has an interest in it later on can go back and find it. And it can go back many years and still be useful. I just had a case this week where one of the members wrote to me about trying to find someone who had presented on a call about 15 years ago. Wanted to get in contact with him based on what he had heard him speak about on that call. Podcasts are becoming very popular nowadays, and so they can be an effective way of communicating knowledge. And once again, you want to have an archive of your podcast so that people who missed one can go back and listen to the previous ones. And the same with any other audio recordings that you may do. Nowadays, videos are probably more prevalent than strictly audio recordings. So as an example, today, this webinar is being recorded using Zoom. Many of you have got experiences in using Zoom or other interactive video conferencing technologies, and they make it easy for you to record. You can make those recordings available so that others can listen to them or view them at a later time. Capturing photos, capturing images, other forms of audio-visual capture can be extremely beneficial to helping an organization reuse that which people have already learned and shown to work. A specific form of capturing communications is the blog. Now, blogs have been around since the early 2000s as a form of what we used to call Web 2.0. Today, they still exist, probably not quite as prevalent as they were at one time, but they're still useful. And you can use blogs inside of an organization to provide a chronological online archive. They can be easily searched, they can be syndicated and subscribed to, and they can help eliminate the need for custom websites and for newsletters. Or if you have a newsletter, a blog is an excellent place to capture the archive of that newsletter. So if you happen to send out a monthly newsletter, in the past, if you didn't have it as part of a blog, then it would be up to people to either have that email in their email folder that have to go back and look for and kind of sort through amongst all their other email to try to find the newsletter that they were looking for, or there'd have to be a website that was separately maintained where these old newsletters were stored. But if you use a blog, it becomes easier because you can just copy the contents of each newsletter into a blog post. And the blog software takes care of keeping it there and keeping it in order and making it searchable and making it findable and so forth. So even though blogs may not be as prevalent as they once were, they're still a useful tool, especially for helping to capture written communications. And the final form of content we'll talk about is training. The types of training that we're all familiar with lend themselves to being captured. So if we start with courses, in the past, training courses were strictly live events. You'd attend let's say a 1-week class, and you take notes during that class. Perhaps they might give you a binder with some materials from the class. But otherwise, what was said during the class wouldn't necessarily have been captured. Today, it's more common, especially at universities, to offer courses online and to offer them asynchronously, which means that the students can take the course at times convenient to them rather than having to be available at a specific time to do it live. With that in mind, a lot of courses today then are on online formats. So therefore, they're captured. The entire presentation is captured, can be reused, and it isn't just a one-time only event, and you don't have to be there live when it's taught. So capturing actual whole training courses is now a viable option. Tutorials, which we think of as probably shorter form videos, are an excellent form of capturing knowledge. And in fact, many people today prefer that as a way of learning. So in the past, if you might have searched for articles about how to do something, today you're more likely to search for videos about how to do something because they can actually show you as well as have a written description of how to do something. So a tutorial becomes an important part of a knowledge management strategy, and capturing those in video form where they can be found and viewed is important. And webinars, such as the one we're doing today. This is being recorded. It can be then watched not only once, but any time in the future. It can be watched repeatedly. It can be watched by different people at different times in different places. So having webinars as part of knowledge management is a useful approach. And if you have regular community events, if you have presentations or speakers, recording those events is an important part of knowledge management. So they're not just done live, they're also available for people who may not have been able to attend it live and would like to view it at a later time. And other types of content to collect beyond the ones we just mentioned could include spreadsheets, records, software source code for development of programs, insights, methods, designs. You can think of other types of content. The question you want to ask yourself whenever you're capturing any of this content is, what's going to be the reuse of this? If it's captured without that in mind, you're probably going to waste time and effort and space and money capturing that which no one cares about. So put some mind to the idea of why is this being captured? How might it be reused? What's its value in the future? And if you can answer that question with what that value might be, and if you can demonstrate over time that the content that you're capturing is in fact being found and is in fact being reused, then you want to continue doing that. But if you find that you have a repository or a database that you've created and you've captured materials in, and you find that it's never reused, you should either reconsider doing it at all or find a better way to publicize the fact that it's there and allow people to find it and use it. The second part of capture that we're going to talk about is capturing information. And so we talked about content in the first part. The information we want to talk about includes personal profiles and skills inventories, project details and win-loss databases, reference accounts, repositories, and knowledge bases. Starting with personal profiles, many of you have probably got these kinds of systems in place within your organizations. If not, there may be efforts to try to create these things. And the idea behind a personal profiling system is that you can allow the individuals in your organization to enter information about who they are, where they are, what they know, and what they're able to do. So that's sort of like the basic information about themselves and also about their skills and about their experience. It can aggregate their contributions, their social media posts, or other activities. So in addition to what they say about themselves, there can be sort of an automated portion of their profile which contains the things they've produced. So if they've posted it on internal enterprise social network, if they've contributed to a repository, if they've recorded a video, whatever they may have done within the organization, it'd be nice to actually pull that together under their profile so that in one place you can not only see a little bit about them, but you can see the outputs that they've created. And this kind of a profiling system can be used for expertise location, finding people with certain skills. It can be used for project staffing when you need to find people to staff a project who have particular experience. And it can be used for creating social networks where people can learn about one another and become better connected to one another. So these are all potential benefits of personal profiles. And the example here is a system that was called the Deloitte People Network when I worked at Deloitte. So a lot of energy went into creating this and updating it and maintaining it and encouraging the employees of Deloitte to put their personal information and skills into the Deloitte People Network. The challenges with having a skills inventory. Number one, it's getting employees to enter and maintain their personal skill data is difficult. So even though there's benefit to having one of these personal profile systems and capturing this information, you'll find that people will be reluctant to spend time doing it. Even if you have mandates from your top management that says, everyone has got to do this, many people will avoid the task. And why is that? It goes back to what Dave Snowden says about capturing information without the presence of a need for it. Without me knowing how it is this skills inventory is going to be used, why do I want to spend a lot of energy and time putting this in if I'm not sure it will ever be used? So it's one thing if somebody calls me up and talks to me and asks me about my experiences and my skills, then I'm probably happy to tell them about it because I can see directly how they're going to use it. But if I put it into a database, I might think to myself, is anybody ever going to use this? So why should I spend time doing it when that's possible? So they'll enter minimal information if they're forced to, but they won't necessarily keep it updated. If they develop new skills, if they have new projects they've worked on that should be used to update their experience, they won't go and do that. It's just not a natural thing to always be updating your skills inventory. So therefore, even though this sounds like a good idea to have one of these, you have to understand what you're up against. It's not going to be a natural thing for people to keep these profiles updated. So therefore, you may do capture, but it may be a one-time capture only, and it won't be current when someone goes to try to retrieve it. Capturing project details is another form of capture. And so in the example here, something called the project profile repository, which we used at Hewlett-Packard, we captured information about every project that we had bid on as well as delivered. The reason for doing this is that you typically find that customers will ask you, where have you done one of these projects that you're proposing to me before? And that, in the absence of a project profile repository, would usually touch off sort of a mad scramble to go off and try to find the answer to that question. You'd be sending out emails saying, has anybody ever delivered a project of this type? And it would become unreliable as a way of answering that customer question. But if you have this kind of a database, then it becomes relatively easy. You just put in the parameters that you're looking for, and you then get a bunch of responses from the query. And then you can go back to your customer and say, here are 3 examples or 5 examples of where we did a similar project. So one of the things that makes this work is that we require this. It was a policy that you had to do this as part of that knowledge capture and reuse process. But we also tried to make it as simple as possible. So getting back to the point of people don't want to do this, you can give them a reason, namely you're required to do it, but then try to make it easy on them to meet that requirement. So make it a simple screen to enter. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. It should be just getting the absolute essential information that you really expect to be reused and not everything else that's potentially extraneous. Kinds of information that was captured would be, what client is this? What industry are they in? What were the details of the solution? And who worked on it? And even if you don't put a lot more of that in there, that alone becomes useful. You can search on it. Once you find the information, you can always go and contact the people if you need more information. So one of the arguments that I would use when people would tell me that they didn't want to fill in the project profile was I'd first start by asking them, did they ever go and try to find this information themselves when they were trying to win a new project? And they would often say yes. And I go, well, if you want to be able to find it, then you also need to be able to supply it. So that gets back to that supply and demand being in equilibrium. So they could see that they weren't going to be able to find these projects when they wanted to find them if nobody else ever inputted them into the repository. So that was part of the argument. But another part of the argument was that I would tell them, you're going to spend more time arguing with me about why you don't want to put in this profile than it would actually take to input it. It's only going to take you 5 minutes. So instead of telling me for 5 minutes why you don't want to do it, why don't you just do it, and then that will be done. So those are some of the reasons that we were able to do it. We also provided assistance. So after they inputted their project profile, we had a quality review, and they would go back to the person and ask them if they were missing anything. So a little bit of assistance also helped. But ultimately, we did get one of these profiles for every project that we worked on. And that was extremely beneficial when we were winning new business by being able to refer to our previous work. Another similar kind of repository is the capturing of references, customer reference accounts. In any business, there's always a need to be able to explain to your potential customers, your prospects, who's done business with you, who will be willing to serve as a good reference, who will tell the new potential customer how they're a satisfied customer, how you did good work for them. That's an important part of selling. But in order to capture these reference accounts, you have to convince the sales force that when they win a new piece of business, to put some information about it into this reference database. And similar to the problem that I mentioned with people not wanting to fill in project profiles or to enter information in skills inventories, same thing is true here. People would say, yeah, I know reference accounts are important, but I'm busy. I'm already working on my next sale. I don't really have time for this. And so it was hard to get people to input their reference account data. So there are several ways to try to help deal with that, to try to help capture this important information. And one way is to provide a way for them to either just send you sort of basic information and pull it out and put it in for them. Another way is to try to capture it directly from systems, sales systems where these things were being entered, or customer relationship management systems where information was being entered already. But another way that I found that worked well was that I scheduled a call that I called Winning the Bid Forum, which we held every week. And what I found was that people were more willing to come on this forum and talk to me about their win than they were to spend time filling in the profiles or filling in the reference account forms. So I would use their reference account form as the outline for my interview. I would ask them questions about the deal they worked on, and then someone else would be taking notes while I did this interview, and they could input all that into the reference form. So the person who did the sale didn't have to fill in the form. All they had to do was talk to me. And even though that might take more time than filling in the form, it was more pleasurable for them. It was easier for them. They'd rather talk about it than type into a form. So instead of spending, let's say, 10 minutes filling in the form, they might spend a half hour on the phone with me in the Winning the Bid form, but they were okay with that. So whatever works to capture the information, the idea is be practical about this. Don't force people to do things that they won't do. Figure out other ways to get them to provide you with the same information and help them capture it so they don't have to do it themselves. Repositories are places that we put structured information and lists and databases and collections, and allows that information to be stored, searched for, and retrieved. So a repository can take the form of like a SharePoint list, could take the form of a database, could take the form of a collection. But the idea is that it's a way that it can be easily searched. It has a structure to it. It has tagging and labeling, so things can be found and retrieved. The project profile repository was one example of a repository. Now, an advantage of repository is that you can combine capture and connection using it. So if you capture things in a repository and you also have communities where people are carrying on discussions, those can fit together well, because when someone asks about a particular type of content, or they ask for help, or they ask a question, and if someone else knows that that's available in a repository, they can point them there. So if someone says, if we ever worked on this kind of project, someone else can go back and say, yes, here's a pointer to that profile in the repository. So it's already been collected and stored, but the connection allows it to be found. And at the time of need, if someone says, this is what I'm looking for, and they haven't gone and searched, someone else can do that and connect them. So I really find that the combination of capture and connection can be a powerful one. Knowledge bases are where we have answers to questions or solutions to problems. These can be customer support, where help desks provide the answers that they provide to customers who call them up. They can be proposal generators that help create proposals. They can be presentation builders that help create presentations. They can initially be seeded with authoritative articles that explain how to do things, and then they can be supplemented by either reference librarians or help desk personnel as they respond to queries. And they can be opened up to end users who can provide self-help. So if instead of having to call your help desk, if you have a really good knowledge base and your customers can use that directly, you can save time and money by having them help themselves going into the knowledge base rather than having to go through the help desk each time. And then the final form of capture we'll talk about today is capturing input. So by input, we're talking about feedback, about recommendations, and about stories. Capturing feedback includes suggestions, corrections, additions, and conducting surveys. This is going out to your user base or your customers and asking them, how can we improve things? What can we do better? What would you like to see? How do you feel about things? These are all useful forms of capturing information about how your customers feel about what you're delivering, and also what they'd like to see in the future. Suggestions are an important form of capture, and you can provide a virtual suggestion box. You can also do this as part of an enterprise social network, where you have a way of people suggesting ideas. And you can also implement a change request process, which can come in for tools, systems, and processes. So if you're operating a knowledge management program, and in that program, there are people, process, and people, process, and technology components, it'd be useful for you to hear from your customers and users what they think about all these. You know, among the things you'd like to know are the things we're providing for you working? Are we missing anything? Is there something else we should be adding? Is there something that we're making you do that you don't like, or doesn't work well, or time consuming or inefficient? Well, if you don't make an explicit attempt to capture this kind of feedback, you may be blissfully unaware and think that you're doing a great job and your knowledge management program is a success, when in fact your users wouldn't agree. So putting in some formal way for people to let you know about this becomes an important tool. And a way that I found helpful is if you have an enterprise social network, such as a Yammer or a Chatter or a Jive, these are kinds of tools that, if you use them wisely, can be used for more than just having people talk to one another. You can actually have a mode where they're actually going to provide suggestions to you through that enterprise social network, and you can respond back to them there to let them know that you've heard their suggestion and what you plan to do about it. And one of the important parts of any suggestion box system or any change request process is that it should be a bidirectional system. It should have a feedback loop, so that if you receive a suggestion, you respond and you let people know that you've heard that and what you plan to do with it. That could be that you're not planning to do anything with it, and here's why. It could be, we are planning to do something with it, and here's what, and here's when. Or it could be that we're going to do some of that, but not all of that, and here's why. But the point is, when you have that whole closed loop where the people hear back about what their suggestion is going to result in, that will then form an incentive for them to keep suggesting. If you can see that your suggestion is actually going to be adopted, that's a powerful incentive to keep suggesting things. On the flip side, if they never do that, if you never hear back, you're not sure whatever happened to it, becomes frustrating, and people will stop suggesting things. So it's not enough to capture it. It's also important to let people know what you plan to do as a result. Surveys are one way of finding out in a formal sense what your users think. They can be one-time surveys where you try to figure out the status at this time, or they could be periodic surveys where you try to find out regularly from different people in the population what they think. You can use these to determine user preferences, needs, challenges, things that they're faced with. And you can find out how people view your institution, its assets, your systems, your tools, and your processes. So for a one-time survey, that could be asking about what do people need. You might be using that at the start of a knowledge management effort to find out what we should focus on, what people want, what their challenges are, what the opportunities they perceive to be, and then use that as important inputs to planning your program. Could be figuring out what exists out there. In large organizations, there can be lots of processes and tools that are in place that are not known to everyone. And if you do a survey, you can find out about them. It may be that there are tools in place that you would like to have more widely used, but you don't know about them, but the survey uncovers them. And that can be what we call a resource survey. A survey where you try to find out what opportunities exist that you could exploit is called an opportunity survey. And then we'll talk a little bit more about an employee satisfaction survey that you can use to capture feedback on how your program is working. So here's an example of an employee satisfaction survey that you could use on a regular basis to find out what your users think about what you're offering. The way that we implemented this at Hewlett Packard is that we had a large audience of people that were using our knowledge management program, and we couldn't survey all of them at once because that would be inefficient. But what we did is we did a random subset, randomly selected subset of the total population. Every month we surveyed a small number of that. So if we had a total of 10,000 people in the organization, you might survey 10 of them once a month. And every month it'd be a different 10 selected at random. And we would not resurvey anyone. So if someone got randomly selected, we'd already asked, we'd select someone else. But over time, you're getting a relatively good representation of your population. And you can continue doing this as long as you're getting useful feedback. So the first part of the survey would ask, how satisfied are you with the following? So we'd ask, how satisfied are you with your manager's support? For you spending time on knowledge sharing and reuse, on your ability to access knowledge resources when you're not connected to the network, on the ability of knowledge reuse activities to save time and effort in your work, on your ability to find the information and knowledge you need to do your job. Second part of the survey, how satisfied are you with the following? So this gets into the actual systems and tools that you're providing. So the first one about the system availability. If you have a system, is it available? Does it work? Is it up? Is it down? Is it hard? What is the availability of it? What experience do you have in searching repositories to find reusable content? This can often be a source of frustration for users. You may have an enterprise search service or search tool that you offer that you may think works well. You'll often find that if you ask your users, they may have a different opinion of it. So you probably want to know about that so you can try to address that either by helping to train them better or to make your system improve or to make more content available or to better tag it. There are lots of remedies, but you have to start by understanding what the situation is. And if you're not aware of what your users are experiencing, then you can't do anything to improve it. How satisfied are they with the experience of locating an expert? Can they find one? When they try, what happens? What have they faced? You want to know about that. If you're going to a lot of trouble to have an expertise location system and it doesn't work well, then why continue to work on that when no one's benefiting from it? Fix it or don't use it. The ease of collaborating with internal colleagues. That people may be having success in working in communities and working in project teams, or they may find that they're unaware of resources that are available to help them and support them in those collaborations. So you want to know how satisfied are they? And the third part of the survey, how satisfied are you with the following? The ease of collaborating with customers, partners, and external colleagues. Your ability to join, participate, and derive value from communities of practice. Most knowledge management programs include communities as part of them. And I've made the assertion that communities are essential parts of knowledge management. And if you have that in place, you can deliver powerful promise to people, but they have to be able to be aware of them. They have to be able to easily find communities to join. They have to be able to derive some benefit from them. You want to find out, is that really happening? If not, you want to put more effort into making your community's program be better known, to work better, to be communicated better. How satisfied are you with the training and documentation for using knowledge resources? If you've put documentation and training in place, is it being used? Is it effective? Are people learning from it? And the services provided by your knowledge help desk. If you have a knowledge help desk in place, a place where people go with questions when they need help, when they're looking for resources, do they find that that's useful? Do they know about the knowledge help desk? Do they use it? How do they contact it? What's been the result? Has it been helpful? Those are the kind of things you want to know so you can, in fact, improve them. Recommendations, another form of feedback that you can put in place. And you can put in place a way of finding out which content that's been captured has been found and has been valuable. So what I recommend is adding a button to your content in a content repository that allows people to say that the content was valuable, or that they were able to reuse it, or that they found it useful. And this would be a simple button similar to a like button, where you just say basically, yeah, I click on that and say, yep, this was valuable content, or I reused this content, or I found this content to be useful. Now, why is that important? Because you can then allow content to be tagged with this as recommended, or a good example, or a proven practice. So when you're sorting through a large body of content and you're trying to figure out which parts of this are the ones that I should spend time looking at and trying to reuse, it's helpful to know that this content was already reused by other people, or it's been reused by lots of other people, and zero in on that as the place to go. But you can only do that if there's a feedback mechanism that you capture that recommendation from your users. So if you don't have this in place, I highly recommend it, because otherwise people are left with sort of the difficult task of doing a search, getting back a lot of search results with lots of documents, and not having any way of sort of prioritizing those results to figure out where they should start. So they might have to look through a lot and read through a lot, download various things, and they get frustrated after time. They can't zero in on the most valuable content. So this recommendation capture can be extremely beneficial. One word of caution is to avoid a recommendation system that's based on the 1 to 5 star content rating. There's often a demand to do this because we're used to this from using Amazon and other consumer services where the rating is provided. But there's a difference between rating inside of a firewall, behind a firewall, and doing it outside in the general population. For one, there's far fewer people doing this rating inside of a company than there would be in the general population of the world. And specifically with content and repositories, there's a lag between the time that you access it and the time that you can make a fair rating. So if I download a document and then I'm supposed to come back later and add a 1 to 5 star rating, I may never come back to do that, right? And I can't rate it when I first access it because I haven't used it yet. So that's a problem. Secondly, within organizations, the identity of the user is generally known. So in an anonymous internet world where I don't know who you are and you give something a low rating, I don't care because I don't know you. But inside of an organization, if you rate my content with 1 star and I know who you are, that's a disincentive for that person to do that, because they don't want to create ill will and they may be reluctant to give a poor rating. So therefore you may get a worthless high ratings rather than getting accurate ratings. Furthermore, you probably won't get a large number. The number of people who rate a document is very low in general, and inside of an organization, it's going to be really low. And I used to say that the number of people rating a document typically is 0 if you use one of these content rating systems. But if there's any ratings at all, it's either going to be, a 1-star rating from some disgruntled person, or a 5-star rating, and it's the person who actually contributed the content giving himself a 5-star rating. So that's not useful. But at any rate, the number of people who rate is going to be statistically insignificant. And thus, I don't recommend this. So don't put time and energy. I've seen this tried at a couple of places. Both times it didn't succeed. So stick with the sort of simple, I like this, or I didn't like this, or I reused it, or I didn't reuse it, binary decision, which is a lot easier for people because they don't want to struggle with what's a 1 versus a 2 versus a 3. It's easier to say, did I reuse it? Yes or no. That's an objective fact, easy to know. Whereas the 1 to 5 is subjective and hard to figure out. So people will just say, it's too hard. I'll avoid it altogether. You can capture stories about successes and failures, stories about how to, and ways of trying to retain knowledge. Success stories include questions like, what challenges did you face? What resources did you use? How did you use those resources to address the challenges? What was the outcome? What benefits did you realize from using the resources? What benefits did your organization derive? Did anyone else benefit as well? For example, a community. What alternatives, instead of the available resources, did you consider? Which alternatives did you try? And if you didn't use the available resources, how do you think the outcome would have been different? So if you capture success stories, that can be a helpful way for people to get a qualitative assessment about a resource or some process that you want to describe that people can say, yeah, they described it and how it worked, and I want to use that as well. Capturing stories about failure can actually be even more powerful than success stories, but can be more challenging because people are more reluctant to talk about it. If the organization has sort of a negative consequence for failure, they'll try to avoid that, and you get success stories, but hard to get failure stories. But if you can create a culture where failure is celebrated because you learn more from it, then capturing those stories can be helpful. And how-to stories can tell about how a problem was solved, how an opportunity was seized, how an innovation was developed, how to perform a task, or how to use a specific system, tool, or method. So capturing those, often in the form of a video, can be a powerful form of capture. Knowledge retention is a big topic and has been for some time. While we deal with the fact that people are retiring and leaving organizations and moving on, and what do you do about that? You can capture retiree stories by having them write them, by having audio recordings where you interview them, by having videos where they are able to be captured and talking about some of their experiences. And you can help guide them by asking people to tell stories on community calls, in apprenticeships, and in recorded videos. So if you're able to capture stories of people's work experience in these different forms, that can be a powerful way to allow the people who have departed to leave behind knowledge that the remaining people can reuse. And so keep in mind that once they're gone, those people may not be available any longer. And if you didn't do anything to try to capture some of their stories along the way, you'll have lost that knowledge. But if you think about it, you need to start doing it well before they leave. You can't say, oh, this person's retiring tomorrow, let's get all their stuff written down today. That won't happen. But if you know that it may happen over the next several years, and you start the process now, you'll have much more chance of success in capturing those stories along the way before they've gone. So we've come to the last part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Brad, but I just want to say I appreciate you joining us for this webinar today. The book, The 5 C's of Knowledge Management, that I've written has a lot more detail about everything we're covering during the webinar series, and hope that you'll take advantage of obtaining that. And I'll turn it back over to Brad to talk about that.
Thank you, Stan, for the wonderful presentation. We're also very excited to announce that you can download a copy of Stan's latest book on our website, The 5 C's of KM, which is part of our Lucidea Lens series. To our audience, if you have any questions about our software, our company, or would like to reach out to Stan, the contact details are on the screen. Please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to this series on knowledge management. On behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you for all attending today, and until next time, thanks.